Hi, thank you for joining us on this day. My name is Lennox Wasara, and I'm excited that you're able to join us today in quite a special conversation I'm having with Mr. Bonang Mohale. He has held several leadership positions in the private sector and has been lauded and recognized with several awards over the past 25 years. He was the Chief Executive Officer of Business Leadership South Africa. He was Chairman of Scull South Africa, Chief Executive Officer of Drake Scull FM SA, private limited company, as well as Chief Executive of Sanlam Limited. He's the Executive Vice President of SAA and Managing Director of Otis Limited at some point. And currently he's the Non-Executive Director at Bidvest. Mr. Mohale is one of the most successful men in the country, arguably. And obviously he's got an illustrious resume, which dates back to the 90s. I mean, he literally got into business. And he's also an author. He's pretty good with a pen and paper. He's the author of the bestseller, Lift As You Rise. Mr. Mohale, thank you for making time for us today. Appreciate it.
Lennox, thank you for having me, my dear brother.
Incredible. I just want to take you back to when you had graduated. Did you know that you were going to get into business upon graduation, or it was like part of the plan, or was it accidental?
Like most people, you start by having a plan in your head. You try to execute the best way you know how. So when I was young, because I knew a little bit of mathematics and biology and physical science, when it was called at that time, I deemed it fit to go to Wits Medical School, where I spent 4 years studying MBBCH. So my business career is actually quite an accident.
Oh,
but
wow.
In hindsight, most successful people that I know studied A and they ended up with B and actually did B very well. So I never really practiced for a day. My first job was as a medical rep. We were called professional sales representative at Pfizer with a P. Now they are making vaccines.
Yeah.
Where I spent 5 glorious years. Thereafter, the same boss that hired me at Pfizer took me with him to Merck Sharp & Dohme. It's an American pharmaceutical company. The head office in Hartford, Connecticut. At that time, in the States, they are called Merck. Outside of the States, they are called MSD. And again, I spent another 5 glorious years where I moved and progressed through product management,
Right.
new business development management. And then I was tasked with starting their export department from scratch. They sold all their products within the borders of South Africa at that time, only 4 provinces versus the 9 that we now have. And my job was to sell to Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Eswatini. I remember when we started in the then Zimbabwe, we probably sold nothing. After a year, we sold 600,000 rands worth of factory sales. By the time I was done, which was 3 years later, we were probably selling 6.5 million rands just in Zimbabwe. So
Wow.
Looking back, I think it wasn't such a bad foray as it were. So I am now into management, into supervision. I enjoyed it so much that I started studying marketing.
Right.
Because I realized that to be a salesperson, you needed a little bit of theory. So I went up probably 3.5 years with marketing management, did the 18 months postgrad diploma at that time, and then did, the accountants called it CASA, Chartered Accountant of Southern Africa. I did the Chartered Marketer of South Africa. Again, another 18 months. People like Professor Russell Abrat was my supervisor at that time. So drove it very hard. So all in all, as I end, spent 11 years in pharmaceuticals,
Right.
where I ended up being on the board of Sandoz products. In fact, I was one of 18 people in the world whose job it was to put together 2 of the 3 pharmaceutical companies, Swiss pharmaceutical companies, Sandoz and Ciba-Geigy. We left Roche out to create a new entity called Novo Artis. Today they're called Novartis. And my boss, Vasela, went on to become the CEO of both entities. Actually, I lived for 18 months at the confluence of France, Germany, and Switzerland, called Basel. And really our job was to write the business case, sell it to the global board. Once it was approved, go to the 114 countries and locations where we had a presence, sell it to the individual CEOs. Once it was approved, our job was then to put the two entities together, rationalize operations, close factories. One of the probably most rewarding of my careers. A boy born in Katlehong, a township thug, now living for 18 months in Basel.
Yeah, it must have been quite a special time for you. Being a pharmaceutical rep, it has a lot to do with shaking a lot of hands, trying to get different people to purchase your pharmaceuticals. Tell us a bit about the sales process, because sales is not an easy game, because you have to persuade somebody to buy something that you're proposing to them. What did you learn in that time? I mean, 10 years, you were doing very well for you to be excelling in that space, particularly as a rep. Sales being something that you're doing on a daily, regularly, and then also having to export to different markets, different challenges, different expectations that they have compared to what you might be used to in South Africa. But what did you learn in that time about the art of persuasion when it comes to trying to close a deal?
Yeah, first, at that time, a medical rep's job was to convince the doctors. So we were selling information, not the physical products.
Oh, right.
Because the law was quite prescriptive. So the factory would make the products, it will send them to the wholesaler. The wholesaler will then supply the pharmacies. The doctor will listen to you as a professional sales representative. When convinced, then they will write the script for the patient after, of course, diagnosis. Then the patient will take the script to the pharmacy. Then we measured our performance by X pharmacy sales. That's how well we knew. So actually at that time, we had to learn more than the medical doctors. Because remember, I was at medical school, and I know that in the 6 years of study, the 7 years of your practicals is called internship at a hospital. In total, you probably do 3 months of pharmacology. Now, we probably did 3 years of pharmacology at that time. So we'd look at these products, what they are prescribed for, the indications, the contraindications, the side effects, and then you'd go and talk to them. People who thought at that time that they were responsible to God. So it wasn't an easy sell, because doctors think we know it all. Yeah. So to tell them about non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs for arthritis, to tell them about probably at that time HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors that bring down the cholesterol levels was quite an art. So the persuasion was actually to people who thought they were actually the cleverest in society. Yeah. So it wasn't always an easy job, but I absolutely loved it, because when you came in, they would actually thought that you are a clinician yourself. I was lucky because I'd probably done more years of this, so I absolutely understood the process. To end off, I think I wasn't too bad, because the first year of doing it, I actually got the PSR of the Year award. Okay. The second year, I created a team, and that team got the Team of the Year award, even though I'd only been there for probably 24 months. Such was the acceleration. But when I look back today and say, but why did I work so hard? Why did I focus so much on doing everything right? I think I put it down to the fear of poverty, because I grew up in the townships, 4-roomed houses. They all looked the same. We didn't even know that we were poor. If you had a little bit of money, you'd put a stoop and big windows. But otherwise, everything was absolutely standard. So it's only later that I realized that I wasn't as well off as I thought I was once I came to Sentin, and then I saw probably Midrand, where the head office was at that time. But I absolutely enjoyed the job. So that really created a nice segue in my ultimately being a senior executive, reporting directly to the CEO, responsible for my own department, and for the first 3 years probably reported to some of our global operations. So a boy from Katlehong, now once a quarter, having to go to report in the US of A. I think it led quite nicely to my being headhunted to be the managing director of the world's biggest and oldest elevator company called Otis. So first 3 years I reported to Paris, the last 2 to Madrid. My boss was Bruno Grob, and when I reported to Madrid, it was Mario Abajo. That's why I learned a little bit of Spanish. And as fate would have it, my daughter, because I used to go with her once a quarter when she was about 6, when I went to report, she fell in love with Madrid. In fact, her first international MBA she did at Instituto de Empresa, University, Europe's #1 university. I didn't know that I was planting the seeds to her for her own future success. She's now done her second master's at the International University of Monaco. So when I ask her, she says, that bag of traveling is because you took me. We went to Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Eswatini, and of course we went to Paris with her every quarter, and I took her with to Madrid every quarter.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk a lot about traveling, but you were not so traveling so much on holiday. You were actually working. So that means that you were dealing with different cultures, different cultural experiences, having come from South Africa. How was that in the business environment, especially having to connect with different business executives or business personnel in the space, whilst they have a different cultural background, you had a different cultural background? How did you bridge the gap to sort of connect with them? Because that can be quite a problem and a barrier to success.
It was scary in the beginning because you go, you are a rep, you meet every Friday in the office to review the week that was, but also to talk about the week that has been planned. And every 6 weeks cycles would go out and have what we called sales meetings. Once a year would have conferences. So they will tell you on Friday to say, we'll meet on Monday morning at 8 o'clock in Bilabila. At that time it was called Varambat. So because I'd never gone anywhere, the furthest I think I'd gone was probably Vereeniging. But I was lucky because when I was in Standard 9, we still call them standards, I won an essay writing competition. The prize was a trip to Malawi as a guest of the life president Ngwazi. So in Standard 9, I'd already been to Malawi, where I lived for 9 months. So at least I knew the inside of the plane. But when they said we'll meet at Bilabila, what I used to do, because I was petrified, I was the first African they had and the only one for 5 years. So I didn't want to be late. So what I would do, I would then go home. I was married at 17 to Susan, the best decision I've ever made. Then on Sunday, we'd get into the car and drive to Bilabila and up to the gate. And sometimes we'd ring the bell and say, look, could we sit down and have lunch? More often than not, they would say no, which was okay. But then I would have measured how long it took me from Boya's View in Davidton to Varambat. And I would know the actual road at that time. There were no Waze or Google Maps at that time. So you had to buy a map at CNA and
figured out the compass.
Yeah, and then, with Cocky pen, map the route and you'll follow that. So Susan will be holding it and I'll be driving and says, no, we're supposed to turn left at the four-way. That's how we did it. And then when we come back, we then really consolidated it. That helped me from that fear that in 5 years that I worked at Pfizer, and I didn't realize, my boss at that time, his name was Brian Franz. As I was leaving to go and join Neville McGregor, who was now at MSD, he said, Bonang, the 5 years that you spent with us, you've never been late once. In fact, we had a sales meeting in Mauritius where 3 of the other reps, we had to call them whilst we were already at Southern Life Park in Sandton, in the bus, going to the airport because
they're running late.
Electricity went off. They had put on their alarms. And because their alarms ran on electricity, they just didn't wake up. So when we phoned them, they packed everything in a suitcase. 15 minutes they were there and we were then able to go. But at that time, we're still trying to arrive at an airport 3 hours before. So that helped us a little bit. At least we were able to catch the flight. So it was a nice affirmation to say, this thing that drove you out of fear, initially the fear of poverty, the fear of arriving at Bilabila where you're going for the first time, and having to rekey the route or to spec the route before the actual day on Monday actually helped me to get recognition to say in that 5 years, I was never late. And today I tell my 2 divine daughters that by the time I turned 40, because of this type of job, I'd been to 100 countries.
Wow. 100 and counting, one would say. I mean, time management is a very crucial component to your success, as you mentioned, that you're always on time and all that. What is sort of like some of the things that helped you to be so good at time management?
So I accelerate now to where I'm an executive, and I end up being elected to be the president of the Black Management Forum.
Yes.
And I joined them because I'd listened to an incredible good quality human being, the late Maduke Lotengloof, and I said, I want to be part of this grouping. And indeed, I worked like crazy. Yeah, ultimately, I was then elected president. At that time, we have an ANC in government, and I could see the erosion of this discipline, of this singularity of focus. So my presidency, I had an African woman, Meko Kukumalo. She runs her own company. At that time, she was a partner at PwC. She ended up as head of compliance at Ernst & Young. We came in and said, you know what, we want our presidency, which is 3 years, by the way, to be characterized just by 2 things. 1, discipline and professionalism. So I remember at that time we had 15,000 members. We had 110 corporate members. They asked, what does it mean? We said, we're going to start every meeting on time. But most importantly, we're going to end every meeting on time. Right. If we did that, imagine as aspirant managers, where it would take us. Lastly, I said discipline and professionalism, so that we don't speak like politicians. Now, politicians, when they stand up, they say, I'm a member of the ANC in good standing. When they ask a question, I remember we had invited Jill Marcus. She was the governor of the Reserve Bank. Instead of saying, Jill, where do you think the interest rates would be at the end of the year? Somebody would stand and say, considering that we are 20 years into democracy, having suffered apartheid, and now we have created entities, and the importance of interest rates, where would you? We said, you know what?
Yeah.
She's the guest speaker, not you. So when you ask your question, be clear, crisp, concise, and precise. And we're able to manage that in 3 years. So when we left, we handed over to a young man called Mngane Mthunzi, who was an executive at Massmart. And when we were leaving, he said, that's one thing that I've learned from the two of you collectively, is that in the 3 years, we started every meeting on time and we finished on time. But also, as human beings, for ourselves, not for anybody else, we brought in a new level of professionalism so that we take not ourselves seriously, but what we do seriously.
Yeah, true. That's indeed true. It reminds me of what I think President Bill Clinton once said, that sometimes when you get criticism, you shouldn't take it, too personal. You got to take it seriously, so to speak. So it's very interesting that you've been able to identify those things, simple but basic, but able to have an incredible impact on progress, performance within the enterprise. Has this been the case for you, where I've heard a lot of people saying that it's not really who you know, it's not really what you know, but it's who you know? Has that really been the case in your career?
I think it's both. So first, it's like saying, should you work hard or should you work smart? So if you worked only hard, it will get you somewhere. If you worked only smart, it will get you somewhere. But if you work both hard and smart, I think not even the sky will be the limit. So you have to be comfortable in your subject matter. You have to know the facts, like your whole life depends on it, on the tips of your fingertips. And you also have to develop close, personal, intimate relationships with people that matter. So your networks, your interfaces, because those are the people that speak for you in your absence.
Right.
So when you say disappointments, I remember an incident, and again, I'll use this as an example. When I was the president of the BMF, we invited the grandfather of democracy, Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, 3 times to come and speak to us in our dinner, where we had 1,500 people, most of them business people. So the first time he's supposed to start at 7, he came at 6.
Oh, wow.
What an amazing lesson.
Yeah.
Not only did he come and stay in the holding room, but he went through the back door and went to the kitchen staff, the people that were cooking, and introduced himself. Here's the president of the republic, and would extend a hand and say, hi, my name is Rolihlahla, as if people didn't know, and would speak to each and every single soul, through one of them, as if he knew them. I mean, what an amazing lesson. Second, the third time. But the first time when he comes, we're young, we're full of energy, and we sing the national anthem because we are newly liberated. And we sing only the healing song by Enoch Sontongwa, Nkosi Sikelel Africa. After we've sung, we sit down. And he was at the podium. He stood absolutely upright and he said nothing for about 3 minutes. It felt like 15 minutes.
Wow.
When he spoke, he said, you guys are going to sing the national anthem again. Because all we knew throughout our struggle years is Nkosi Sikelel' Africa, which by that time was the national anthem of 4 other African countries before we even became free, including Zambia and Tanzania. And we had to now sing this stem, which we had not practiced. But we did, because he stood there and he wouldn't budge. That was the first disappointment for me, to say, how can we disappoint our own guest, who's our president? He gave us a flag that we all stand under, and a national anthem that we're supposed to swear allegiance to, like our constitution. But we did what was comfortable. From that moment on, I can tell you, I learned the words of the national anthem, Nkosi Sikelel' Africa in isiXhosa, the Sesotho version, Morena Buluka, Setjhaba sa Heso, and the West of Apartheid, which is the stem as it was, and then the English portion, which is the last stanza of this, and the last line in English that says, we shall strive and live for freedom in South Africa, our land, knowing that that last piece at best is aspirational, because the majority of people don't even own the land. But at least that's what we're hoping for, that eventually most of us, 90% of the population that is black, living in 13% of the geographic area, will look at this land and say, this is the primary means of production. So lessons throughout life.
Indeed. I mean, you've been able to build quite a powerful network, a strong network over the years. One marvels at that. And, as a young person listening, you think, well, what advice do you have to other youngsters and how they can build their network and go about and make it as powerful as it can get?
Maybe 2 things. So the first, it's part of your work, but you have to really take an interest. So let me talk about just the last piece. When I was the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, so I took an early retirement from Shell at the age 55 because I didn't need to work. My 2 daughters, they'd gone to school, they'd qualified, and I said, but why do I continue to kill myself? I don't need the money. The 89 CEOs of big companies, all of them listed on the Johannesburg Securities Exchange, then look at me and say, you're crazy. How can you retire at age 55? Come and be our boss. So I was asked to be the CEO of other CEOs, as the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. I had every single solitary one of them on my speed dial, because today we use technology through our cell phones. So when I get out of here, if you say, could you give me the number for Stephen Kosef of Investec, I'll be able to give it to you. Simpiwe Chabalala, who's the group CEO of Standard Bank, I'll be able to do that. If you said of Sakumzi Makozoma, who was the deputy chairman of Stanbic at that time, that owned Standard Bank and Liberty Life, I'll be able to do that. So it's about that attention to detail and putting them so that when you need them, you press 1 and you are able to get hold of them. So that was the first. The second piece is, what then do you do with this information? Because I regard myself as a change agent, as a defender of democracy, and then lastly as a social justice activist, with the influence that we have and being temporary occupants of the corridors of power, there are 2 other things that is required of us, because I'm a beneficiary of patriarchy. So it's this notion of gender equality and pay parity. Now that I've got this, how am I going to use it? I said, I'm going to use it to kick down the doors of corporate South Africa to bring in more women. So when you look at my history, where I was finally accountable, I've always left women in charge, most notably African women. If I'm not succeeding, at least a black person, because that's what transformation means for us. So at BLSA, I left an amazing warrior of a woman, Mebusi Mavuso, who is the CEO. I worked with her for 20 months when I was comfortable to leave and say, you're now on your own. But when you call me, I will never let the sun set without coming back to you. But I'm not going to look over your shoulder. It's your show. You need to describe, define, and shape it in your own image. At the Bidvest Group Limited, where I'm chairman of the board, this company employs 135,000 people. It has 6 divisions. It has 350 companies. So we have about 350 CEOs. When I took over as chairman, there was only 1 woman on the board, Nompumelelo Mpumi Tembekile Madisa. One woman. Within a year of taking over, we now have 80% of that board being black, 70% being women. And this in less than 24 months. And that is absolutely true in all the companies that have been associated with. That's how you use and leverage this network. At Shell Oil Products Africa was looking after 33 of the then 53 African countries. Now there's 55 African countries, 54 of them absolutely sovereign. The head of legal is Metabile Mulukume. The CFO is an African woman that I paid for to ensure that she spends 2 years with her daughter in the Netherlands so that she can develop her own networks. With the full knowledge when she left that you are going there to learn, because when you come back, you're going to be the group CFO of Shell. At Shell, at that time, it had 10 business units. We were looking at our retail business, oil, chemicals, aviation, and lubricants business, amongst others. She came back to become the group CFO of that. And of course, we left Ndate Hloniphizwe Justice Mdolo as the group CEO. And the same with Otis, the world's biggest and oldest elevator company, was managing director in 1996. Carol Hunt was my executive assistant. But after 3 years of working with her, I then said, don't you want to be a supervisor? No, I'm okay. She started the Otis line. When people are stuck in the lift, you pressed, it went to the Otis line. She could sit on the board and then be able to dispatch a lift mechanic who would then come and free you. In the urban areas, this would take 30 minutes. In the rural areas, it would take no less than an hour. She put that system in place. She managed it. She brought us to a point where we could have predictive technology, where the lift would tell you before it stops so that she can send a mechanic before we even go. By the time I left, I was only there for 5 years. She was head of our HSSE as an acronym for Health, Safety, Security, and Environment. When I told my boss, Mario Abajo, that I'm making an executive, Mario put his hands on his head and said, in the 222 locations and countries where Otis has a presence, we've never had a woman who's head of HSSE. We've never had one who herself is not a lift mechanic. We've never had one who's progressed from being an executive assistant to become that. Carol Hunt became that. After I'd left, Otis promoted her to be the head of HSSE, not for Otis South Africa, but for Otis EMEA, which was Africa, Middle East, and Europe at that time, as a testament that the decision we took was absolutely the correct one. The lesson I learned as I end is that when your boss wants you to succeed, you will succeed. Because nobody's born an MD or a president or a chairman. It's the opportunity that you are given. Somebody believes in you, counsel, coaches, and holds you by the hand. If they believe that you will succeed, of course you will succeed.
Women empowerment underscores really your leadership as well. You just made a great example of that. And why is it we are still struggling? Like a lot of the other executives don't have the same sort of thinking that you have. I've spoken to a few executives before, and not all of them have that sort of like mindset of women empowerment and also the backing it up with the action, right? You've got a whole paper trail of how you can show us what you've actually achieved. What more can executives do to make sure that this is the case, and also for young people who are the next executives and the next generation to ensure that they go in with that type of mindset of empowering women and ensuring that, you know, they're making the playing field very equal and fair for everyone?
It's manifestly in our own interest as men to kick down the corporate doors for women, because the proverbial glass ceiling has now become a concrete block. Sure. Tabia Kabinde is the chairperson of the Employment Equity Commission. She's just released her 22nd report, and it tells us the same story every year. It says women constitute 51% of 60.1 million South Africans. And yet their positions in the C-suite is less than 24%. African women, less than 4%. And every year, we release this report and then we don't see a lot of movement. Similarly with black people, they are 90% of the population. Because when you read the Employment Equity Act, it defines who's black. It says everyone who's excluded on the basis that they're not white. It also says it's everyone that was living and working in South Africa before 1994 and therefore are victims of apartheid law as it was. And it says it is black collectively for African, colored, and Indians. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely defined. And it says for black people, who are now 90% of the population, their representation in positions of leadership has just improved from 14.3% last year to 14.7% this year. At this rate, it means it will take us 150 years for us to be broadly reflective of the demographics. The reason why I'm saying it's short-sighted of men if they're not opening up to women is because the pandemic has actually taught us that of the 8 countries that have women as heads of state, they've dealt better with the pandemic than those who were men ahead of state, including New Zealand with only 5 million population, and Germany with Angela Merkel and all the Scandinavian countries led by women. They've dealt better with this pandemic because you see, women naturally have the attributes that are required for leadership in the 21st century, of intuition, of deeply connecting with other human beings, of putting in the center as the most important asset people, not profits, not bricks and mortar, not the balance sheet. Because the company that is poor on people is a dead company indeed. Because those companies that are led by women, science tells us, evidence is replete to say those companies are more profitable, they are better managed, they are more effective and efficient. They are the best companies to work for. They command more multiple upon exit. And that's where most people are joyful when they're part of that. And yet, we don't do it ordinarily. And as I end, we also know that when you take a smartphone and you put it in the hands of women, not only does the education, nutrition, and health of their own children improve, but of the entire society and community from which they come. So if we want a more peaceful world, a world that has successfully migrated from the integrated reporting when we're talking about the 3 Ps of planet, people, and profits, now talking about ESG as an acronym for environment, society, and governance, on our way towards the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs.
Yeah.
We need to be taking the absolute leadership of women much more seriously, because this to them comes absolutely naturally, including trusting your own instinct. In leadership terms, we call it something else, but it is so innate in them. So I think this notion of being an African man who's a beneficiary of patriarchy, where the society expects me to be an MD and a leader, having gone through the oppression, the exclusion, the subjugation, it behooves me, in fact, I am mandated to kick down the doors to open up for women who, at the very least, are triply oppressed in that intersectionality of race, gender, and class.
Yeah, a lot of will you have in doing that, because one of the things that men throw around sometimes is the fact that there's a sense of resistance that they experience when they're actually trying to initiate some of these new policies and implementing some of these new approaches in how we view leadership and who should take over the mantle of leadership when they success other leaders. But you seem to have had quite a strong will about this, and speaks again to your motivation, because you spoke moments ago about the fact that, you know, the fear of poverty was what motivated you to work so hard. But I mean, at some point life changed for you, and, you know, you probably weren't staying where you were staying. You probably moved, as you mentioned, to a more upmarket environment. What allowed you to stay motivated, even though your circumstances changed, to ensure that you're still pitched up on time, you're still motivated to get the work done? I mean, there's a sense of comfort that can come with great success, but it hasn't been the story with you.
Absolutely. Let me enter the last piece around gender equality and pay parity, because it's so important. I think we have to be very deliberate, very purposeful, very conscious about it. Of the 18 people that I'm currently mentoring, 16 of them are women, only 2 are men. Of the 16 that are women, 9 of them are CEOs as we speak. Right. And I think to a large measure, because if it took me 20 years to become an MD, is it possible that by sharing the little that I know, it could take them 5 years? So where we are now, of course, I left the township a long time ago.
Yeah.
So my first house that we owned was at Boyer's View, where we bought a stand and we built our own home. Susan and I, she was still a student at that time doing social work, BA social work at Bidvest, my alma mater. So I was the first in my own family to own my own house, not a rented municipality house, but also the first to own a car. So when I wanted to buy in a white suburb, there were still Group Areas Act, so we couldn't. So in places like Kelvin, you could go to your company or other white people and say, I'll buy a house using the nominee system. Well, write a piece of paper that says, it is my house, but I can't register it as such because I'm breaking the law. I would register it in the company's name to create a CC or in Jan van Riebeck's name, for instance. That's how the Royal Bafokeng actually ended up clinging to their piece of land, because a Methodist priest saw during the 1913 Land Act, when land was forcibly taken away from them, to say, they're coming for you guys. I will register your land in my name. And they trusted him. When he left to go back to Germany, he gave them the title deed to say, this is your piece of paper. Upon conversion, they realized that where that land was, actually they were sitting on some quite useful minerals, including diamonds. That's why the Royal Bafokeng is now the richest, probably clan in the country. When Impala Plates wanted to buy them, only 25%, they were prepared to pay 19 billion as far back as 3 weeks ago. So we used that system. So I lived in town. So the first place we bought, Susan and I, with our one daughter at that time, because the other one was not born, Maneo, was at number 12 Hub Street in Ralphfield Extension 3 in Benoni. So there, in our own name, we could do that because it was after we were free. From Benoni, I then became the MD of Otis Elevators. On the N12, we realized that I'm spending an hour in traffic. We then said, can we go and buy in Bedfordview? So the first house we bought, I can still remember, was 36,000 rand. 3-bedroomed house. It had a bathroom inside. It had a proper kitchen with undercutter, oven, glass hob, and extractor fan, when we were using Welcome Dover stoves. So it was quite an improvement. So the one we bought in Rheinfeld was 160,000. So it was 3 times more. I remember Susie said, can we afford this? When we bought in Bedfordview, we bought for 900,000. When I was promoted to be the CEO of Sanlam, we bought a house at number 1 Dalsach Road in Vegeboom in Durbanville. We paid 3 million rand. So you can see the steady progression. So when we came back to Joburg, after 3.5 years of being in Cape Town, we bought in Bryanston. Now, this is really the mink and manure. We probably spent 30 million rand on that house. The first one in 51A, we spent probably 6.4 million. The one we currently live in, probably 30 million. But I'm telling the story so that we can say to young people, the role models no longer live with you in the townships. But you can't continue having role models. You see a guy on Tuesday, he's got nothing. He's sitting around smoking. And then on Friday, he rocks up with a maroon BMW X5M with white leather interior. And nobody even asks the question, where did you get this? It's either cash in transit or they probably got a tender. That things take time. It took Susan and I, we've been happily married on the 24th of August, 40 glorious years to get to the house that is our dream house. Because all these others, there were houses that were comfortable, but we knew it's not our dream home. What we have spent in lawyers and in transfer fees, in conveyancing fees, would have finished a bond in a proper house, probably in center. But because you knew that you grew up poor, you step change and step change and step change. So 5-6 houses later, you have probably spent 5 million just on lawyers' fees. This is what other people spend on a bond in one house, and it takes them 20 years to pay it off. And yet that's what we choose. But again, as I end, I really say this so that to the young people we can say, patience pays. Go to school, it takes you 20, 23 years of hard work and application. It is possible for you to be born in an informal settlement in Alexander, an area the size of 6 square kilometers, 750,000 people, just across the bridge from the richest square mile in Africa called Sandton. And then you are able to afford a house in the leafy suburbs of Bryanston. Not because you want a tender, but because you earned it, you deserve it, and you can afford it. good things take a bit of time. And having that patience, that discipline, that professionalism does help a little bit. Today, we have a narrative that says, all I need to do is to be a member of the ANC Youth League or to stand for local government elections in Alexander as a councillor. Once I'm elected mayor, I get out of an informal settlement. I have a motorcade of 8 cars. Then I can live in a council house in Sandton. I can buy a car worth probably R1 million. It negates this hard work of people going to school. They say, I can work for 36 months on the ground and just be a politician and I'll be able to get this. Yeah. So the difference between somebody who's born in Bryanston and the one born in Alexander is exactly that the one in Bryanston is probably going to go on to achieve greater things. The one in Alexander is probably going to continue being poor in the self-perpetuating vicious cycle of abject poverty. Our government is not helping, because it makes them perpetually dependent on this 350 social stimulus.
Yeah.
Whereas what we should be doing is to help them to start their own businesses, because we must start our own businesses to hire our own children. Because I think it's madness to continue to make babies and send them to a different neighborhood, to go down on their knees asking for a job from somebody else. Because you see, there's an African adage that says, a child that is not embraced by his village will burn it down in order to feel its warmth. So what the pandemic has taught us is that when women, fisher women, can't go out to sea, they repair their nets. So what are we going to do 27 years into democracy? To repair our nets. To say what we did in 27 years. The face of poverty is still primarily black and feminine. We haven't changed that. We haven't moved the dial. Is there something that we're going to do differently so that we can say, how can I belong to myself so that I'm present for others?
Yeah, that's true. I think one of the, to your point about patience, one of the big things now is social media makes it a little harder for young folks like me to stay patient. And that's sort of one of the stumbling blocks in the process of, as you mentioned, waiting 40 years, one would want to wait four months instead, because of social media, you're constantly seeing some people progress rapidly quicker, and then you feel as though, well, it must happen a little bit quicker to me. But I think that is reassuring, the fact that hard work and discipline can indeed get you to where you want to get to, even though it would take you a couple of years. Well, the output and the end goal remains the same. I want to chat a bit more about entrepreneurship. You mentioned entrepreneurship now as one of the options for the youth, as opposed to trying to just move the ground quickly to get a quick fix out of their situation. When it comes to entrepreneurship, it remains one of the great alternatives. With a high unemployment rate, 2021 has shown us that the unemployment rate has reached some record highs. And one worries, with the state of the country, with many people worried about corruption and all those things. Entrepreneurship then is really in your own hands as a person. What opportunity do you see? What is your view on how can one begin from the process? Perhaps somebody listening now thinking, okay, well, I've never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur. How would you sort of guide that person to sort of navigate their turf?
So first, entrepreneurship is critical for a number of reasons. Because everywhere else in the world, new jobs created are by small and medium enterprises. So we chose to be part of the BRICS economic bloc. So when you compare ourselves with our BRICS counterparts, more than 60% of new jobs are created by SMEs. In South Africa, it's south of 15%.
Sure.
So it's about having a conversation that says, how do we inculcate a culture of entrepreneurship to allow people to take risks and to leverage the infrastructure we have to make it easy for people to start businesses and set them up for success, not fold our arms and say, start a business, see to finish. And there are good examples. Jewish people run businesses very well because they've got capital. When one says, I'm starting a dry clean, they say, how much do you need? They're able to crowdfund very quickly and they lend.
Indeed.
But the second thing that they do, the next morning they come to support you. That's what makes your business successful. The same with Muslim communities. I ran Shell Oil Products Africa. We had 750 Shell service stations. 28% of them were owned by people of Indian extraction. They were particularly successful because, again, they supported each other and one another. And we can learn those lessons so that success is not an accident. So what can big companies do to young people to make it easy for you to start a business? So you shouldn't even have to worry. I should be the one that comes to you and say, you know what, I'm looking after Shell Oil Products Africa. And there are some stuff here that are not core to us. I want to give them to you, sell them to you, and make it easy for you to get finance and give you a 10-year contract so that you can come and work here, knowing that from day one, you have security for 10 years. And I'm not talking about giving you a catering contract or a cleaning contract or providing toilet paper. That is so 90s. I'm saying in our head office at the Dimension Data Campus in Branston, can you provide the lifts, the electromechanical things? Can you provide the air conditioners? Because the long-term annuity income is from your servicing them.
Yeah,
can we go to BMW and say all the leathers of all the BMWs in the world come from South Africa? Because in Babelig, outside of Pretoria, they make BMW 3 Series for the rest of the world. But that's where all the leather comes from. Every African, especially in rural areas, they have a few cattle. As they slaughter, can we teach them to treat these hides in a particular way so that they can, and then we provide this? That's real business. Not what our government does by saying we're going to build a new road between Pretoria and Maputo, and it's called the N4. And it's 4 lanes going that way, 4 lanes coming back. And they give them to big construction companies, the usual suspects. And then as an afterthought and say, oh, but we have a law called Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment, as amended in 2007. And we've forgotten about these blacks. So we'll give you a tender to mow the grass between the 2 lanes. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the real thing here. And big business has a role to play. Last, big business can say, once we have helped you to start your own company and we've given you a 10-year contract, which allows you to take this piece of paper to go and raise finance from a bank because there's the collateral, there's the surety. The next thing we need to say is, can I pay you within 30 days? Because cash flow is absolutely critical to small and medium enterprises. To the better ones, can we even pay you in 7 days? The business people will say, but if I pay you in 30 days, I lose the interest had I paid you in 90 days. Yes, but by doing that, our BBBE law says, you pay early, you can claim it back in BE points. So the difference is that for you to comply so that it's easy for other companies to do business with you, it's probably out of 109 points. For you to get level 4, which is 1 for 100% BE recognition, is probably 89 points.
Yeah.
But if you've got 89 points and you are short of 1 point, because there's only 5 points to move from one level to the other, and you do this type of thing, and you have an early settlement, there's 5 points that you can get just by paying early. And from level 4 to level 3 is 110%. Level 2 is 125%. If you are level 1, it's 135%, which means if you spend 10 million with you, you can claim 14 million as your own procurement spend. Therefore, actually, net, it's in your interest as big business to pay small and medium enterprises early, Black-owned, especially Black women-owned companies.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk about the role of big business. Let's talk a bit about the role of learning institutions, universities and the likes. What is their role when it comes to entrepreneurship? Because I get a sense that a lot of students get a feeling that, the entrepreneurship is more theoretical, which it should be theoretically grounded. But, there's a lack of practical experience that one would not have upon graduation to sort of kick things off for themselves. Because, yes, I've got this theory, but I might have the entrepreneurial mindset, but I don't really have the practical experience to have an appreciation of how things work. What can we do to bridge that gap?
So first, we should have a course called entrepreneurship, a degree called entrepreneurship, and a PhD in entrepreneurship. At the moment, we don't do it as a matter of course. Secondly, it can't be theoretical because it depends as how you set up the faculty. Maybe a confession. So my first honorary professorship I got from the University of Pretoria in the Faculty of Marketing. For 3 years, I was asked to serve another 3 years where I serve on the advisory council. I'm on to my third 3-year term as an honorary professor. But the real professorship I got at the University of Johannesburg, where I'm called Professor of Practice. Professor of Practice,
right.
because I've been there, done that. I've started some businesses, including our own family business, even the ones that we own today. 7 of them that we invested in, 3 that we own 100%. Got that. And then Chancellor of the University of the Free State. And in those 3 institutions, including this institution, the advice we are giving is that the best run business schools in the world, Harvard, with the biggest endowment in the world, when you look at their model as to how they are able to do this, they leverage their alumni. But also they've got on their Senate more business people than academics. So when you want the executive director for a business school, instead of putting an ad that says, we want somebody with a PhD who's got 23 papers published, etc., you can say, we want a Maurice Radebe, who has been an executive vice president at Sasol for 32 years, who had started his own businesses, who has spent 12 years as the head of retail at Shell, because he can be a professor of practice. He will teach these kids what he has done, what he has started, and he'll be able to show them in the right direction. When they're looking for a loan, he'll be able to pick up a phone and say, let me talk to Colin Coleman at Goldman Sachs and make you an appointment for 12 o'clock. That's how practical it is, but at a much more theoretical level. Before democracy, only 7% of the population would go to university. Since we became free, we increased that to 11%. That's not enough. And we did something else that we shouldn't have done. We looked at reviewing our educational system. And then we decided to close teachers' training colleges, nursing colleges, and technical vocational colleges, where people would be lift mechanics. You'd be an artisan, fitters and tanners, millwrights and electricians. The people that buy houses in Don Park, where Chris Hani was assassinated, and Leondale, are blue-collar workers. Those are the people who've learned these trades. Transnet, that's how it was used as a crucible for these things. That spawned many businesses, like Altron, that is now being run by Mteto Nyati, for instance. That's where you create this thing. So you have to be really very purposeful and conscious about it. You have to learn from countries like Germany. Not everybody needs grade 12. We used to call it matric. They catch you at standard 8, and they teach you how to be a motor mechanic. Germany today makes the best cars in the world, because they are the makers of Mercedes-Benz, of BMW, of Audi, of Volkswagen, of Porsche, for instance. Because they teach these people. So we have lost those skills. We used to have them. I think we need to get them onto vocational guidance. Today, I pay more per hour to my plumber than to my cardiothoracic surgeon. So it just shows you where the world has moved. And yet, because we've been oppressed for so long, and all of us want prominence now, we all want our kids to be academics and to have degrees. Whereas there's a vocation. You can learn to do with your hands. Economies are driven by the production of goods that you then trade with other countries, and services that you can then sell to the highest bidder. And that's the part that we have lost. The last piece is that, but when you come to institutions like this, you and I is still foreign to you and I. When you go to a graduation hall, it doesn't look like us. The murals, the art, it's not reflective of us. It's not only foreign, but it's outrightly hostile. So imagine a woman that comes from Limpopo at 22, comes to that for the first time, and sees a flashing toilet for the first time. And you put this through a normal program and you expect them to pass on the first year. They've never even seen the inside of a library. So there's a piece about how do we together create an inclusive academic excellence. The emphasis on inclusive. So that we bring about this notion of social justice approach to academia and public ownership of the 26 public universities, where the public is both an important stakeholder but also beneficiaries, so that when you close it at 8 o'clock and the kids go for adult basic education, can the community come and use it? Can they come and use it on Sunday, your great hall, for them to come and earn their pension, instead of waking up at 4 o'clock where it's probably unsafe? Can we bring about a contextual academic freedom where all of us feel free to speak our mind without any fear of retributions or reprisals. Lastly, I think that's what young people have taught us during hashtag everything must fall movement, precipitated by the hashtag fees must fall, hashtag roads must fall.
Right.
And we need to build upon that. At the moment, we talk about 10 billion rands worth of historical debt. And yet we have a government that is supposed to be responsive. We need to come up with programs that can expunge this debt so that we start from scratch. But also we look at sustainable funding models, because it can't be every year in January that these kids toy.
It's the same cycle.
Because they've been excluded because they can't afford. Therefore, education has become the preserve of those that can have. Even though NSFAS tries, it can be more effective and efficient. Yeah. It shouldn't be. You should be coming from Marabastad, deep rural area, and you come here, you come to a residence. We have a program where you have a personal mentor that shows you around and says, this is how you study, this is the library. When you've got difficulties, you come to me. You can't get your stipend and then you go and buy a jean for 2,000 rand, or you buy the cell phone as the first thing, even though we know the pandemic has taught us that we need smart technology and access and indeed remote learning. But just so that at least you are financially astute and commercially bright about how you look at your options. So there's a piece to be done by academics like us and people who are overseeing as chancellors, institutions, to say, how do we make access that much easier and more affordable and much comfortable for the 11%, maybe to 17%. But also, how do we shift some of our buildings into vocations? I mean, UCT is now teaching high school, competing with private education.
Yeah.
To say we want to come up with a curriculum that is easier for you to transition. But imagine if we connected with the private sector so that tell us the skills you need for the fourth industrial revolution, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, of robotics.
Right.
So that we start preparing them now, so that we are relevant to give you what you want, so that we can grow our own team by as it will.
Interesting. I mean, when you speak, you mentioned a lot of issues here, and I could almost put a finger on ethical leadership as probably one of the reasons why the lack of ethical leadership, one of the reasons why we are where we are now. But one of my friends always says you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So speaking to the sense that sometimes the older generation might not be able to try and get them to be ethical leaders because maybe they might have their own views on things. But more so to my peers, what can we do to become more ethical leaders as we start growing in our roles and perhaps as we take over corporate South Africa? What should we do to see more young ethical leaders?
But you see, leadership is an important part, because what's the definition of leadership? Anybody that is called upon to lead is a leader. If you're a bus driver, be the best driver that you possibly can be. If you're a plumber, be the best plumber. That's leadership. Most of the people who are doing manual and janitorial jobs in our factories and companies are leaders of churches and communities back where they go. I had an executive assistant who became a councillor in Soweto when we became free. I didn't even know that part of her. So when we say ethical leadership, in strict academic terms, it's tautologous, because leadership can't be anything but ethical. Right. But for emphasis, we say ethical leadership so that people are not confused. So when we look at our politicians, we say, we want three things from you. Number one, we want you to be ethical leaders. Number two, we say, we want this notion of absolute transparency. You must tell us what you're doing with our dreams and visions and hopes, but also with our money. Lastly, we want to bring about this notion of final accountability. So when you steal money that doesn't belong to you, you must go to jail. There must be consequences. And then we say to young people, what does it mean really ethical leadership? We say you must have a dream that even scares you.
Right.
Because if your dreams don't scare you, it's probably not worth pursuing. So you must have some sort of a compelling vision. Even the Bible says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Secondly, you must have courage.
Right.
You can't be a leader if you don't have the courage of your own conviction. The conviction to do that which you think is right makes sense, irrespective of consequences. That's what Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela did, Oliver Reginald Tambo, 27 years in Robben Island, because they were middle class. But they said, we can't be free until the other black people are free.
Yeah.
Because they learned it from Kwame Nkrumah to say Ghana, 1957, the first country to be free in Africa. But will never really be free until the rest of Africa is free. from Cape to Cairo, Malagasy to Morocco. Thirdly, it says you also have to have integrity. You can't call yourself a leader when your intent is not wholesome. You have to love your people to lead them.
Right.
Because leadership presupposes followership. So those things we have now forgotten. You are a counselor, you in it for yourself, it's self-serving, egocentric. That's not what leadership is about. There's a wonderful book written by a Nigerian author called Leaders Eat Last.
Leaders Eat Last.
So if you're a Zulu man in KwaZulu-Natal and you cook the chicken, you need to stop saying, I'll eat first until I'm full, and then I'll leave the bones and the gravy to my wife and 2 kids. If you're a leader of the household, you then say, you, my children and my wife, pick the best pieces, and then whatever is left, that's what I'll eat. That's what leadership. Even biblically speaking, it says, the man is the head of the household, the same way that Christ is the leader of the church. Not to give instructions, but to serve.
Right.
Therefore, men as leaders of households is to listen better, to serve better, to put the best interest of the family before their very own. Then we're into leadership. Imagine if young people did that. The gender-based violence and femicide will be less, because they'll treat every woman the same way that they want their own sisters to be treated.
You mentioned moments ago, as we were wrapping things up, about the fact that when you're in Standard 9, you won an award that got you out to Malawi for being the best writer. You've continued with the passion of writing, because that same passion and skill won you the bestseller as the book Lift As You Rise. What were you trying to convey in that book? What was the key message?
So the good news is that on Wednesday, because today is Friday, I got hold of my second book.
Amazing.
Called Behold the Turtle. So it's being formally launched on the 30th of November at a place of significance, Constitution Hill. So Lift As You Rise, it's an African adage. Like behold the turtle, it's an African adage. Because in full it says, behold the turtle, it only makes progress when its neck is stuck out. So once you are comfortable and you are afraid to risk, you're not going to go far. It's only once your neck is stuck out that you can make progress, move forward in space and in time. As South Africans, we need to risk it all to hold our leadership finally accountable. Risk it all to be able to say, not in our name. So Lift As You Rise says, you don't need to wait until at a personal level. You have the corner office, you are called MD, President, or CEO, before you lift another human being as you rise. It says there is no exercise more powerful for the heart than extending a head down and lifting as you rise. It says you don't have to wait until you are at the pinnacle of the corporate ladder of success. Take 1 or 2 rungs in the corporate ladder of success and lift another human being at the personal level. It says if you are a government, you have to lead with the heart of a servant. Because servant leadership, it's not a leader with many servants. Because the best amongst us lead with the heart of a servant. It says if you're a business, you need to continue to do well by doing good. Because it's only by doing good that money comes until it comes out of your ears. It says you can't continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. Because when business does well, society generally does well. It ends by saying, you see, nature is a wonderful metaphor for business. Because nothing that nature does for itself. It does for others. Nature is not self, it's the other-centric. That's why rivers don't drink their own water. Trees don't eat their own fruit. The sun doesn't shine because itself needs the vitamin D. Flowers don't give us this wonderful fragrance because they want to smell like Fontainebleau versus Calcutta. They do it for others. Therefore, when we graduate from being selfish to being unselfish on our way to being selfless, we will get the true meaning of absolute triumph and joy.
Indeed, that's very true. I mean, I like that. I like that a lot. My final question to you is really about your legacy. How would you put it in your own words?
Maybe legacy for me is what my grandmother taught me, to say we are blessed with 3/3 of our lives. The first third is to learn, so that the middle or the second third is to earn, make the money. To do what? So that the last third is to share it. That's the realm of benevolence, of being an angel investor, where you want, because you have already walked the path, you have been to that destination, you have to take your people to that destination. It's the realm of philanthropy. That's the legacy that I want to leave, to say, Bonang lived, worked very hard, made a bit of money, and used all that money to lift other Africans, so that you can't associate poverty with blackness and with being feminine. We have to change that narrative. Because when we get it right, I'll be able to take my daughters to any other African who's been successful as a direct result of my own input. And I know that they'll be in good hands.
Indeed. Well, you've shared a lot of wisdom, you've shared a lot of insight, and you really inspired me in many ways today, and couldn't be more thankful than I am. So thank you so much for making time out of your busy schedule, because I know you're always busy, but the fact that you're able to grace us your time and just share your insights with the next generation of leaders, I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Lennox, my dear brother, for the opportunity.
That does bring us to the end of our interesting conversation. Fascinating speaking to Mr. Bonang Mohale, who's an executive. He's had an illustrious career in business, as you heard, and truly describing a world, one that has so many possibilities, so many opportunities, right? But one that requires us to remain entrepreneurial and resilient, hardworking, disciplined, and to continue to abide to that precious thing called time management being key to his success as well. So thank you so much for joining this conversation. Do remember to leave your comments, your thoughts on the comment section. And also, we will be in touch shortly. And thank you very much for joining us. We'll meet again. It's nothing but love and light. Goodbye.